Good morning. Wow, it's good to be together and good to have a full table here, as well as our folks on Zoom with us. This, of course, is the first of 4 sessions called Where Was God? Theological Responses to the Holocaust. And I'll say more about that in a little bit. Today is really, in a big way, about sort of setting the stage a little bit for talking about what is it that we're talking about when we talk about theological responses to the Holocaust, and we'll look at one of them today as well, and I'll do all the handouts and everything in a little bit. What I would love to start with is just briefly, if you could say your name and what brings you here, what interests you about this topic that you hope that we'll explore in our 4-part sessions. Will help me too for future sessions. So your name, what brings you here, what you're hoping to get out of the 4 sessions. Hopefully you'll join us for all 4. Ready? Yeah, I'd like to give people a second.
My name is Steve Motter. What brings me here is because I think a lot of parallels with the Holocaust is what's happening now in the world with Israel.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, we talk every Friday night about Mi Chamocha, and we talk about the miracle of the parting of the sea. And I'm wondering why are we out of miracles? And why can't something be done now to sort of protect people in a time when we have you can have faith, but it sort of questions your faith why innocent people are persecuted, which has happened throughout time. So my hope is that I can get a theological understanding of why there isn't some divine intervention at this time and in previous times.
I'm Barbara Motter. I'm Steve's other half. And I'm in the B'nai Mitzvot class, and I'm trying to up the ante. I haven't been participatory in many of these gatherings. And something just came up in my head. I'll share it quickly. After 9/11, at the time, I was teaching in a K-8 school, and I was the art teacher. I had the whole school, 500 kids, and I had a 2nd grade class, and the kids were in community tables for art projects, and there was a big argument going on that I had to, put this fire out, and the kids were arguing because one of the little 7-year-olds said, the kids were saying, she said there's no God because of what happened on 9/11. Is that true, Mrs. Martyr? And, my goal was to get them back on task. And I said, what do you mean there's no God? You think that, and of course, I had to be really careful, teaching and making. I said, you think God caused that? I said, think of yourself. When you got up this morning, you had a choice to be good or bad all day long. I said, bad people did. Oh, yeah, that's right. And as I walked away and they were going back to their thing, all the kids pointed to the one who had said there's no God and said, see? And, and I know that that's just a little anecdote thing, but, I think that I think faith is more important now than ever. And I think I really believe that God didn't do this. But it's, people did it, but what made people do it that's a whole other thing. And what scares me is that some of the people who did it say it was the message from their God, and so I think that all this should be discussed and worked out. So sorry I took so long.
Thanks, Barbara. So my name is Ed Bernard. My wife and I live in Hopkinton. And the reason I'm here is Rabbi's sermon loves your sermon on yesterday. And what I I was a chaplain in an acute care hospice facility where I used to see up to 6 people die a day. And I realized my theology is always very individualistic. And I realized yours is very community oriented. So I thought like, wow, I need to expand my perspective to address this, be able to address it with people. Why suffering exists.
My name is Ellen Jayer. I'm in the B'nai Torah class this year. And this is when the rabbi introduced this topic, I thought it was extraordinarily interesting just for what was going on in the world at that time. And months ago, you thought that this was going to be his topic. And now, since what has occurred in the world, I find it even more prevalent because I have a granddaughter that is a student in Washington, D.C. And last night, her father had to have her stay in a hotel off campus because of the rioting that was going on there. So it just brings home to me that we have to figure this out. It just can't continue like this, that we all have to have faith and we all have to know that we're human beings and we have to work together, not in totally diverse manners. And it's really upsetting to me right now.
I'm Ted Geller. I am in the name Mitzvah class, sans my lack of Hebrew, but we'll figure that out. The reason why I think this is going to be interesting is I took a class called Facing History and Ourselves, which is all about the Holocaust, but a much different perspective. It's about the individuals and the steps that were taken and the small steps that were taken to get there. So I think looking at the theological perspective will be really interesting to be able to talk about and see.
I'm Scott Cantor, and I'm here to examine difficulties within my maintaining faith in the world. There's a lot of ups and a lot of downs, and I have difficulty rationalizing it in peace. So I'm looking to take any kind of perspective from you and from everyone else here.
I'm Carol Cantor, and throughout many decades, I've certainly watched enough movies and TV and documentaries on the Holocaust. I never thought that something like this that's happened since October 7th would be so drastic, and I will have a continuing fear of the irrational behavior of the opposite side that controls innocent people as well as Israelis. The fact that Israeli government and people protect their own and will send their own forces in to just retrieve a soldier that has passed away. They put their lives on the line, and yet we have the Hamas, who, and everybody knows this, who uses their people as shields. And when I watch a lot of this on TV, and when I hear the young people, not the Jewish kids, I've seen enough of them this week that's tearing my heart apart. The fear that they have. There's one girl that had a Jewish star on, and she showed how her mom had called her and said, you need to take that off. And the girl showed how if you pulled the chain lightly, it just became pieces. It took away the star. And so I've seen kids from Cornell, Brown, Barnard, Harvard. I don't know if any of you people saw what happened at Harvard the other night when they encircled, when other students encircled the Jewish male. They encircled him and wouldn't let him move. And every time he tried to move and duck the sheets that were enclosing him on posts, he would duck. And this whole thing is so disconcerting. But the fact that these Palestinian children are taught, and I've read books on it, are taught from when they start school that Israelis are bad, Jews are bad, Israel has to go. If it's so endemic to their philosophy from young children, I don't see how any of this is ever going to change. I'm discouraged.
I'm Laura. I'm also in the B'nai Mitzvah class, so that's part of like learning as much as I can about things theological in whatever direction. Like many of you, the Holocaust has always been something that I've known about and studied. So And especially given what everyone has said about what's going on in the world right now, it seems even more important to do this now.
My name's Andy. And there's not too much more I want to add to what everybody else has already said. The existence of the Holocaust has shaken my faith many times in my life. And I've wondered. And I'm glad the rabbi has decided to take up this subject because it's something I've questioned myself. Now, I noticed in the course of everybody else's, well, most people's comments, we've broadened this from just the Holocaust to anti-Semitism worldwide forever. Current events have forced us to do that. The similarity is not is obvious rather. So I'm curious whether you've changed the curriculum in the last month from what you originally thought you were going to teach. If we have to go 6 or 8 weeks, that's fine.
I'm Madeline Miller, and I mean, a lot of my, excuse my voice, I don't have much of a voice. A lot of the thoughts that people have said in their concerns and their feelings, to me, is just horrific. And what's going on in schools and in colleges and even with innocent people in Gaza, people that are good people. I mean, just the genocide on both sides, it's awful what's happening and how anti-Semitism has always been here, but it's so much more so. And even schools that we've heard before that they don't, even in the United States, they don't recognize the Holocaust. They won't teach it in schools anymore because it never existed. And just the hatred. I mean, we're all the same people. And I have a hard time having this happen again, because we always said, never again. And here we are in a situation where it's all over the world, every country. And just the hatred of one particular religion or nationality, it's so hard for me to understand. It really is. And my heart goes out to the people that are caught up in it on all sides. And I'm having a hard time understanding why it's as bad as it is. And so I need a better understanding. That's why I came to this class, because I think it's so important to me to look back at what happened and then just to kind of see what's happening now.
Thanks, Marla. Carol, hand over.
I'm sitting here thinking about all the many reasons that I decided to prioritize this today. And I think the major reason is that I'm so angry. I read a piece on CNN written by a Columbia University professor talking about his 2 young children and how he had always planned that they would follow him and study at Columbia, but he no longer feels that way because of all that's gone on in that university and others like it. And he said there's a howl inside of him that doesn't have a place to go. And I thought that sort of said what I'm feeling, that there's this howl, like, how can this happen to us again? Never again. So I'm here. I need to deal with what's going on inside of me before I can help anybody else.
Thank you, Carol.
Sure.
Jeff and Barb?
My name is Barbara Sands. I find the need now to be with other like-minded people. It's amazing to me that not everybody feels the way we do, but it's the case. And education is the answer. Of course, you're preaching to the choir when you have this group, but we learn more, we talk to other people, and perhaps that will help. I watched, it was just unbelievable. I watched something on Facebook where young people, students in New York, I don't know what college they were from or even if they were in college, but they were asked to sign a petition to support Hamas. they had no idea what they were signing. Absolutely no idea. They just said, "Oh yeah," because they thought it was the Palestinian, Palestinian cause. So I will do Liz Corps. I will go to services. I will do whatever makes me feel good after Friday night coming home from a service. I was calm until I watched the news again. So whatever helps, I will do.
Hi, my name is Jeff, and I agree with everything everybody has said so far. But when I think back, and Rabbi, I think about some of the sermons you've done as we talk to different books of the Torah, that Jews throughout our history, we've always questioned whether there was a God, because things that we've always felt persecuted, going back to Egypt and all the way through. Moses comes down with the 10 Commandments, and he greets a flock of people who are still questioning God. And why are we being persecuted? And you see the same story over and over and over again through our history. Yes, the Holocaust was a horror, but Jews throughout history have always felt that the world was against them. We did something wrong. We're the bad people, and we should be punished for it. And I'm here today, and through the course of this, to just maybe get an understanding of why. You can question it all, and just the question why keeps coming to my mind.
Thanks, Jeff. Ellie and Bill?
I'm not sure I agree with what Jeff just offered, that we, the Jewish people, have always felt that we were inferior and therefore deserved to be persecuted. Perhaps I misunderstood what Jeff said, but I don't think it was the Jews who felt that they were deserving of the treatment that has been, brought upon us over the millennia. I think the first person who spoke, Steve Martyr, hit the nail on the head. Are there no miracles any longer? How could the Holocaust, if there is a God, how could God allow the Holocaust to take place? And then, of course, we can advance that to 2023 and ask the same question about Hamas. And hopefully that will come out in our discussion over the next several weeks.
Thank you, Bill. Ellie, anything to share?
Ellie Ambinder. I'm in the Bat Mitzvah class. I'm very happy to do that. I would just like to say that I have always been very proud to be Jewish and very clear cut if anybody asked me that's who I was and that I liked it. And I still like it, but I'm now afraid because the signs of what is going on in the world and in Israel are so overwhelming that I just don't even know quite what to think. It was one thing to ask, why did the Holocaust happen? But are we now in that same mode all over again? I don't know any answers here. So that's all.
Thanks, Ellie. Merle?
I'm here to grapple. These questions people have raised, is there a God? Why is there evil? How can we have so many religions that seem to share the same values, yet we have quote unquote holy wars? So I'm here to grapple with that. Similar to what Steve said about, are there miracles, and such a theme in services about working towards peace? Is there ever going to be worldwide peace? And then for myself, the legacy of the Holocaust is a wound that does not heal. Although I'm proud to be Jewish, I feel I've also internalized some negativity. So I think I'm hoping in part through this that it will help me with some personal healing. Yeah.
Thank you, Merle. Lynn?
Hi, I'm Lynn Cron. A lot of it has to, is what everyone else has said. I feel the sadness, the despair. I've always been interested in the Holocaust and how people handled it or went through it and still had faith. And like everyone else, can't believe what's going on, that they want to obliterate Israel and all Jews. I also, when I struggled with faith and the belief of God a number of years ago, I read Bad Things Happen to Good People. And that gave me some peace that this isn't an act of God. There are bad people in the world, but I'm glad to be here. I need some solace. I need some faith. And that's why I'm here.
Thank you, Lynn. David Lappin? David, do you want to come off mute and share with us a little bit?
Hello, I'm David. I have always had a hard time grappling with the concept of God. And to me, the Holocaust is so overwhelming that I can't even wrap my head around it. But when I see what's going on in the world today, it just sort of, makes me feel more, I just can't get the concept of God into my head, how he could allow such things to happen. And I know, in my life, I've never really experienced overt anti-Semitism, but after 77 years, I feel very fearful today, being a Jew, and not putting myself out there too much because I'm fearful for what's going on in this world.
Thank you, David. Stu Clark?
I've also very often questioned God. I am a first generation. I see pictures of what's going on in Israel. And again, we are so protected here. However, we have an incredible concentration down here of Holocaust survivors, of Israelis who still have family in Israel. And we are every Friday night are read letters to us from colleagues in Israel of our rabbi down here. And it's mind-boggling how they're coping with it. And they are. And we keep praying and we keep sending and we keep praying some more. But it's still, it's beyond my purview. And there are times where I can't even watch the television because it's so skewed sometimes to what they say and how they present it and how they say who's at fault. And I just keep praying. That's all I can say. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah, do you want to share a little bit? What brings you here?
I think not yet. I want to listen a little bit more and then I can share my thoughts in the final. Is that okay?
That's totally fine, Sarah. Wonderful. Thank you. So I want to say I always like to open by saying that we'll finish by 12:30, which we'll do also today. I think it's really important that we shared what we just shared, and that each person was able to sort of put out there what we're feeling, what's on our hearts right now. There's so much hurt and so much pain and so much sadness that feels like it sort of overshadows anything else. It becomes so much at the forefront of our minds, and how we carry ourselves throughout the day and how we think of ourselves Jewishly. I think that had I started on October 2nd, I think is actually when I was going to start this class. Had it been October 2nd or October 1st and not right November, whatever today is 5th,
It would be different.
this would have looked different, right? And part of what we're asking is really the fundamental question of why is there hate in the world? Why do bad things happen more generally? Why do bad things happen to seemingly good people, right? I mean, we think about the children and babies who were ripped out of homes in Israel, and we also think of the poor children who have done nothing wrong in Gaza and are being killed, right? And we can have our reasons and our discussion and the politics around that, but we have to acknowledge also the deep, deep hurt and pain of innocent life being lost. So I'm going to slow us down from where I thought we were going to maybe get to today, and that's okay. And I want us to think, because Holocaust thinkers and theological Holocaust thinkers have sometimes seen the Holocaust in particular as something different, right? And in our generation, or in our month, when we've seen something so horrific that we simply cannot wrap our minds around, that is where our mind goes. And at the end of today, we'll get to, and is the Holocaust something different? So that's something to just sort of hold up for a second. Where I think we'll start is just by talking a little bit about what is it that we're talking about when we talk about theology and the Holocaust, and perhaps more generally, right? The question of why do bad things happen to good people? The sort of theme or topic that we're talking about when we talk about why do bad things happen to good people is called theodicy. Okay, it's a fancy word. I actually don't even know how it theo is God and dicey is, it's dicey. No, I'm just kidding. I don't actually know. But right, the question is why do bad things happen to good people, and how do we rationalize an idea? How can we possibly rationalize an idea of an existence of God when we see that bad things happen to good people? And to break it down perhaps a little bit more, or to go into it in a little bit more detail, we have an idea that God is good, and we have an idea that God is all powerful. And if we want to hold those two up, it can become very difficult, right? To say that God is good, which is perhaps a fundamental idea of Judaism, and we'll play with that a little bit over these 4 sessions. And God is all powerful, which I think we'll also play with a little bit over these 4 sessions. If we try and hold those both up, and we say that, right, we look at the Holocaust, we look at, right, we can think of it on an individual level. Why do children get cancer, right? Why do bad things exist in the world? This theodicy question becomes very difficult to hold up. I'm curious who's read the book, the Harold Kushner book, Why Bad Things Happen to Good People.
Actually,
Yeah.
can I just nitpick?
Please. Yeah.
He specifically said he called his book "When Bad Things Happen."
Oh,
to
thank you.
People,
Yeah.
because we might not really get to why.
Yeah.
And he addresses that in his book. I've read it, I don't know how many times, especially at the high holidays. So
Yeah. Thank you. And thanks. I knew it wasn't sounding right. Right. The question is we can hold up that question, but when bad things happen to good people is the name of his book. Anybody feel like they could give a 2-sentence synopsis of the book? Like what he says? It's okay if not. Oh, and I'm sorry, I can't see our folks on Zoom, so you can feel free to jump on in. Yeah, Merle, please.
Well, I was just when I think about that book, I always think about Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. Mm-hmm. So to me, the message, it's not even when or why, it's that this is part of life. And then how do you go on? How do you make meaning from when something bad happens?
Right.
And he also talks about the story of Job, this idea that bad things can happen, and it doesn't mean that people have done something either to deserve it, or, it's not about whether we're good people, and finding reasons to blame ourselves isn't always productive or helpful.
Great. So trying to find a reason isn't always helpful is one way to think about it. We're not going to Job would be another several year course probably to really get into it. But there is a biblical story of a person who goes through very, very terrible experiences in his life, loses his whole family, and tries to figure out sort of why. And we could look at theological responses to Job too, but part of it is recognizing that suffering exists, that bad things do happen in life, and sort of, where do we go from that? Which I think, Merle, you're bringing up Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, which is sort of the next step out of that. Not so much the God question, where is God in it, but how do I move forward knowing that life is difficult, terrible things happen, etc. I'm curious, for those who have read When Bad Things Happen to Good People, I think that there's an amount of solace that, right, in reading and sort of starting to understand, or not necessarily understand, but be able to find a way forward. And as we share today, we don't necessarily say, oh, well, free will exists, right? Like, people do what they're going to do, and there's hate in the world. And so we can't move on from that. I see it on our faces and I hear it in what we're saying. And so, as much as there is solace, or we can move forward in, right, believing in God, possibly in different ways, even knowing that evil exists in the world, that suffering exists, it can only bring a certain amount of solace when we think about terrible events like the Holocaust, when we think about the events of October 7th. And so I guess I want to say from the outset, sort of, that we're in a deeply painful place right now to even be grappling with these questions. And there's a certain amount of challenge in that too. When we talk about theodicy, when we talk about, right, God is good, God is all powerful, and how can we hold those up? I wanted to share a quote that I think really gets to the heart of what it is we're trying to figure out here when it comes specifically to God and theological responses. Rabbi Yitz Greenberg, who we'll be looking at as part of our study, he said the following. He said, "No statement, theological or otherwise, should be made that would not be credible in the presence of burning children." Which is to say, anything that we say about who God is or what God does needs to feel, I would say, feel right knowing how painful and terrible the world can be, right? And so that's something for me, personally, I try to hold up in the way that I talk about God, which is, right, not that everything happens for a reason, for example, because that doesn't work, right? When you think about the Holocaust, when you think about October 7th. I will say also that it becomes very difficult for us sometimes to square the notion of God and the actions of God in the Torah in particular with the God that we want to come out of theology, or the God that we end up talking about. Right? We see notions of vengeance, of reward and punishment, right? Things that we, as modern people, don't want to necessarily associate with God. And there are ways to understand that as well that we'll get to throughout these 4 sessions. But I want to say, I think sometimes we, when we're younger, we get these ideas of, right, God who sits on a throne and either writes your name in the good book or the bad book for this year. And that's very much a high holiday theme that we have, that we sort of try to undo as we get older, because it's a little too simplistic and can get us to just sort of say, forget that. I can't understand God that way. And so I will not believe in God. I will not, right? It's caused people to leave Judaism over it. Because they say, I can't reconcile this God. And so as we look at theology after the Holocaust, we're going to be trying to sort of recover and rediscover how we might think about God in light of the Holocaust. Yeah, Andy,
are we going to discuss just the theologies of Jewish theologians on this, or are we going to talk about other people? How do Christians view the Holocaust? How do Buddhists view the Holocaust? Have they even offered an opinion on it?
Right. Sure, they have. And I'm trying to think about the theologians that I've been looking at to possibly bring as part of the session. And they are all Jewish that I've chosen, but that doesn't mean that it has to stay that way. Part of me wanted to, see what it is that we're thinking about as part of this first day, and help tailor the rest of the sessions around that as well. I'm wondering if there's anything else coming up for folks right now on your mind that you're thinking about before we start looking at some text together.
No question. I saw online a statement and I listened to her sermon from a rabbi in New York. Well, I think Rabbi Splansky said she was in the Central Congregation of New York, and she belonged to an interfaith group in New York. And she tried to get the interfaith group to come out with a statement against what was happening in Israel. And the group could not do that. They could not issue a statement for all the theologians on this group, on the Interfaith Council with it. And I'm just wondering, has the Interfaith Council in Framingham, I know we had a service where there was some in attendance, but has the Interfaith group in Framingham come out with a statement condemning the actions that have taken place in Israel?
Sure. I will say that that's not happened. And I will say that the interfaith group in Framingham has not generally done very much of that generally, that we've actually said that part of our work together is about making those interfaith connections and coming together. I'm happy to talk more about it offline, but there hasn't been a lot of joint statements in the last year since I've been on the interfaith group.
The other thing that came to mind is that the survivors of the Holocaust, there were 2 groups. One who they gave up religion. And then there was another group that really became strong in religion. And I remember reading somewhere where they said there is no God in the concentration camps, and they said, well, let us pray now. So I think there's really a dichotomy with people believe, but I think this is really a big test on faith. And I find it very, very difficult to understand what's going on if you're a person of faith. And you can say, well, when bad things happen to good people, why? And I have a lot of difficulty dealing with it. And you told us to look at the times of Israel, but I see that there's publications now of soldiers who have been killed in the IDF, and it shows pictures of people smiling, and they came to fight for Israel, and now in their 20s and 23, 30s, they're now dead. And I have a lot of difficulty dealing with that. I can't understand it. And while we say the Holocaust was a despicable thing and terrible thing, I can't understand what's going on in America. I mean, I know there were pro-German marches during the Second World War, and there were all sorts of Jewish gatherings in Times Square, in the Madison Square Garden, trying to help the Jewish people. But I've never seen such a thing on campuses and with young people who really think that Israel is a colonizing country and they really deny rights to people. I find it very, very difficult. I mean,
and that somehow Jews in America have some kind of we have some kind of influence over foreign policy because Israel is a foreign country, right? That Jews as a group have any kind that Israelis and the Israeli government and Jews all over the world are one and the same, and they're not.
Right. I have it's right. It's a separate topic, though it's very much on our minds right now. But I listened to a really great podcast this week that I'm happy to share about anti-Semitism and about what we're seeing and trying to understand it a little bit more because, right, it's the oldest hatred, anti-Semitism, right, and it's come back in scary ways that we've seen, not just over the last month, though certainly we've seen a sharp rise in the last month, but over the last several years in this country, in different ways and for different reasons. And there's sort of a more maybe holistic approach to how we might think about anti-Semitism that's suggested. So I'm happy to share that from this last week as well. Yeah, Marla.
I think the one, when you were backtracking to the interfaith community, and if I remember correctly, Reverend Debbie Clark from Edwards Church said a wonderful letter. Yeah, so she really, I think that was wonderful. Yeah, to support, to be with us, to support us.
That's right. Yeah, thank you. And I meant to mention that it's in this month to Beam.
Yes.
It was printed from Edwards Church, and their Love and Faith in Action committee wrote a really, really beautiful note to our community. And Reverend J. Anthony Lloyd was here for our service just after. And so, right, it's not to say that individuals and communities have not been showing up for us. We will have also our Interfaith Thanksgiving service in a couple of weeks on the 19th at 5 p.m. at First Parish Church. And can imagine that we're going to hear some themes there too.
Rabbi, what was the podcast that you were referring to?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to look it up and send it out because it's not one that I'm familiar with, but I will send it out. Yeah. Yeah, I've got a podcast for everything these days. Yeah, Barbara.
Well, I don't know. I think maybe the reality is we've been living in a bubble for generations, and I think anti-Semitism has been there. It just hasn't necessarily reared its ugly head. But I mean, Harvard has a huge history of anti-Semitism. I have an uncle who went there in 1914. He lived in Cambridge. My maternal side came from Cambridge. And so, I mean, if you lived there, I think he went for free. He was a commuter student, but he was never integrated into the social, nor were several cousins who went there around that same time as well. I mean, there's if you walk through Harvard Yard, the buildings still have the names of known anti-Semites. They didn't change the names. They have all these different little signs. I wasn't there that long ago. I was there not that long. I mean, making all these apologies to Native Americans and the burial grounds around there and everything else. A lot of apologies, but nothing about Jewish people. I think we have this idea that if the world knew about the Holocaust, it would never happen again. And my problem is that knowledge doesn't necessarily change feelings. And this is, even in Germany, back when influential Jews were sort of hobnobbing with future Nazis, it was like, we'll say who's Jewish. And that's the whole thing. Who's Jewish? Influential people got a little bit of a pass, and regular Jewish people didn't. And but I think we've never been safe. And I think that a lot of us made this assumption that we were really well integrated into society, and that came with acceptance of who we are and what we believe in. And I question that now a lot.
Yeah, I think these questions touch on a lot of different topics, right? That we see and feel today. Marla, did you have something that you wanted to say?
No, not.
Okay.
I think it was Andy.
I did.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Andy.
I want to offer a very different note. I'm optimistic. We have this crisis going on now where Israel is frequently portrayed as the bad guy and people are picking on Jews. But so many things are not happening. I don't know of any Arab country that recognizes Israel, and there are several now, who has withdrawn their recognition or actually said anything other than pro forma condemnation of what Hamas or what Israel is doing. They recognize that this whole thing was triggered by a violent attack on Israel by Hamas. Most of Europe has been behind Israel. They'll criticize their tactics at the moment, and I criticize it too. I'm not sure exactly whether they have an endgame strategy, and that's several editorials have been written about that. But for the most part, European nations have been carefully corralling the anti-Semitic demonstrations in their country, and speaking of Israel's right to defend itself. This whole incident began on the 7th of October, and I wondered, why did Hamas do this when they know, pardon the expression, the wrath of God was going to come down on them if they did, and it has. What did they hope to gain? I think they started it because they were desperate. I think I mentioned this once in our Minyan group meeting. The Israelis and the Saudis were on the verge of having mutual recognition. And so many other Arab countries have already done that. Hamas's stated goal is the destruction of Israel and the reinstatement of the entire state of Palestine, all right, from the desert to the sea. And if these Arab countries finally gave up on that and were willing to recognize the existence of Israel, Hamas was about to be just erased from history. What they wanted was to be in control of Palestine, all of Palestine, and that wasn't about to happen. I think they struck out of desperation because they could not let this happen. Unfortunately, the current Israeli government has played right into their game by turning themselves from victim into villain. They could be a great deal smarter about how they went about eradicating Hamas, but their need to do so is pretty much universally recognized, and there have been very few condemnations. 3 countries, I think, have withdrawn their recognition of Israel, all of them small South American countries, and I'm not sure why.
So, Andy, I appreciate this, and I think I know that our community needs space and time to just sort of process this together. I want to try and stay away from the political in this conversation, at least. And I also want to recognize, again, we're going to give some time over the next couple of weeks that we just need to get it on the calendar for folks in our community to just be together and have these discussions. And it's part of the reason that I want today to also just be with the 20 or more of us who are sitting here together in our community to be able to share a little bit what's on our minds and on our hearts. And I don't want us to get too far away from the topic of this lifelong learning. So what we'll do, I want to look just at one short piece. So this is what we'll end with today. Is it's a piece from this incredible, I can't highly recommend it enough, book called Sacred Fragments: Recovering Theology for the Modern Jew. It's what it has a huge part of what brought me to the rabbinate was being able to, he distills in really incredible ways lots of theologies that are out there, and covers a lot of different topics just from the table of contents: revelation, religious authority, knowing God, talking about God, sensing God's presence, proving God's existence, encountering God, suffering, and ritual. Those are his chapter topics, and he goes through lots of different theologians and what their thoughts are on different topics, and sort of, well, what is the question exactly that we're dealing with? And at a time in my life when I was not sure about the existence of God at all, or didn't have the language for how I understood God, this book really helped bring me back. So highly recommend it. We're going to look at this front page here, God in Auschwitz, and it's from his suffering section. So let's read a little bit, right? He's going to sort of define for us what is the question that we're dealing with. Would somebody like to read out loud? Thanks, Scott.
God in Auschwitz. With the Holocaust, the problem of evil acquires a new and terrifying urgency. Jewish theological responses to the Holocaust can be grouped into two broad classes. The first sees the Holocaust as one more instance of human cruelty, perhaps more massive than ever, but not intrinsically different, and hence not posing significantly new theological or religious challenges. The death of 6 million Jews and countless other human beings is not necessarily more problematic than the death of one innocent child. The Jewish theological tradition in this view has developed resources to deal with the problem, and these resources are applied to the Holocaust. The other view sees the Holocaust as totally unprecedented. The sheer scope of the massacre, the malevolence with which it was perpetrated, the machine-like efficiency of the Nazi death camps, the active involvement and passive acquiescence of countless ordinary human beings, the fact that the world of Auschwitz was conceived and carried out by the most cultured of European nations, any or all of these factors make the Holocaust totally unique. In this view, the resources that the tradition has evolved for dealing with suffering are simply inadequate. We cannot write this trauma off as one more instance of human cruelty. The vexing theological question, where was God, will not go away by simply postulating human freedom. In fact, it is made all the more poignant by Judaism's cardinal claim that God and Israel share a unique intimacy. Indeed, then, where was he? Why did he let it happen?
Oh, and by the way, this is by Rabbi Neil Gillman, who passed away some years ago. He was in the conservative movement. So he's sort of laying out for us how we might think about theology and the Holocaust. So I'm curious, especially I would say in light of today's discussion, where might you fall? How does this meet you in terms of can we see the Holocaust? Can we understand the Holocaust within maybe other frameworks of, right, when bad things happen to good people? Can we understand it within the framework of the way that the world works and exists? Or, to our minds, do we see it as something totally separate, something for which we have no way to really understand it, especially the way that he puts it, right? The sheer scope, the malevolence with which it was perpetrated, the machine-like efficiency of the Nazi death camps, active involvement and passive acquiescence of countless ordinary human beings. and right, a cultured European nation. Where does that sit with you in terms of, is this something new or is it the same?
Sometimes I sort of feel like it's both. It depends on the day. That to some degree, it does feel like, kind of like what we were talking about, that anti-Semitism has always existed. And there have always been people who do cruel things, whether for religious reasons or multitude of other reasons. But on the other hand, this was such a huge scope, and all of the things that he talks about, like the number of people that would have had to either agree with him or at least look the other way, is breathtaking. So in some ways, I'm kind of on both sides with that one.
Thank you. Folks online. Oh yeah, please, Merle. I apologize.
Okay, that's all right. I know it's a. Let me see if I can find what I had up. Okay, so I know this relates to the Lease Corps program, because thoughts I had if we had people from different backgrounds coming to the programs, and how would we make a statement about that also recognize that there have been others who've been targets of hate and descendants of genocides, and wanting to respect that, but what made this different. And my messaging was that the Shoah was unprecedented in its magnitude, with the aim of total annihilation of the majority Jewish targets, and in the methods and scale, using government policies and infrastructure to systematically disenfranchise others and establish and operate killing centers. So, and what you just covered now added another dimension, and just, I guess, thinking about the setting, being in, cultured society, that this would also go on. And but yeah, so definitely I think that it's as I said, there's been other genocides and people being targets of hate, but not on the scale and magnitude of the Holocaust, and not in the way that how systematic and the aim of total annihilation.
Thank you, Merle. Any other thoughts to share in this moment?
And Rabbi, I'd like to just, this is Ellie, I'd like to just say that in collaboration with what Merle just said, I believe the Holocaust was the only movement by a country, by a political movement that sought to get rid of the Jews. It was the only policy of a government to go forward and annihilate a people. So that backs right into what Merle was saying.
At the same time, I wonder, actually, knowing other genocides that have been perpetrated and are ongoing. I think about the Uyghurs in China. There are things sometimes that we don't even, right? There are genocides that we don't hear about until after they're completed. I think about facing history in ourselves, actually, Ted, and I don't know if this was part of your learning with facing history in ourselves, but it focuses on the Holocaust to also recognize other genocides in the world, and to ensure our part in making sure that it won't happen again, even though we know that they do. I mean,
there's a huge focus on upstanders and bystanders.
Yeah.
And that's what allowed it to happen, in Nazi Germany, is people thought that it was a joke. Like, they thought the Nazi Party was a joke, that Hitler was a joke. And the chancellor, all the way up to the chancellor, well, he is an idiot, so I'll make him my little puppet. Then the chancellor died, and it was like out of the playbook for Hitler, But the steps that were taken, the focus that I had, at least with the instructors that I had, were that, like, it was little steps that were taken. Like, first you stir up the anti-Semitism, then you boycott businesses, you don't let the kids go to school, you close the parks. All right, then we'll rest on that for a little bit. Then you ramp it up, another couple notches. Then the Kristallnacht happens. So now you actually have violence, and it's just the graduated steps that were taken, to sell a bill of goods. The propaganda was unbelievable that went on.
So I don't know if people know this. This is now, for talking about genocide education, this is now a requirement for 6th to 8th graders in Massachusetts, that we're going to be learning about the Holocaust and other genocides. Like it's a mandatory part of the history and social studies curriculum going forward.
Yeah.
Does that include for indigenous people?
So I'm not sure entirely.
I don't know. I know with the Facing History curriculum that I had, the one that I took focused primarily on the Holocaust. But then there's another one actually that was, I don't want to get totally off cut, but another course about like Boston busing. They cover a lot of issues, and racism and anti-Semitism, and they try to make connections. There's a lot of making connections, so you can recognize the signs of these things happening. And that's really what the focus of the education. So you see what anti-Semitism happening, and it kind of helps you deal with that and how you can counteract it so that it doesn't ramp up.
We do some of it in 5th grade because we study American history, and I can only assume they get deeper into it in 8th grade when they return to American history. I don't know if it addresses Native Americans as a specific group as far as genocide education, but I know it's definitely part of what I'm covering with my 5th graders. So
I get very worried about programs like that. Too many kids are going to see that everybody hated the Jews, and they're going to wonder why. They're going to start coming up with reasons themselves why we should hate the Jews. Obviously, so many people did before. Can they all be wrong? That's an attitude that some younger minds might take. Look at what's going on at colleges. Where did those kids get those ideas?
I think it's I can only say what I've seen, that we talk a lot about who has a voice and who doesn't in history. Like the way we've studied history up to this point, and who's been able to tell their story and who hasn't. Like one of the things I talk about with my 6th graders is there's an African proverb that says, until the lions have their own historians, the story of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. We talk about it in terms of who has a voice and who doesn't.
I would argue that those people, Andy, are probably the ones that are ignorant, that didn't have a Facing History class.
Right.
So I'd push the other side. I'd say if the individuals around, and hopefully there are individuals around these, whatever, anti-Semites, have had a course or instruction, whatever it is, doesn't have to be Facing History, a brain in their head, they would know to counteract that, right? Not by violence, but it's like a lot of it too. It can also cross over to bullying, right? Like if somebody's being bullied, right, you have a couple of choices to make. You can ignore it, or it's safely, hopefully, especially if it's in a school setting, do something to get somebody to stop the bullying, right? Then you have other people that are going to step in and really, wait, that actually stopped that idiot from doing that, or whatever we're calling them. So you gain support, hopefully, on the other side, right? You can see that in these college campuses, I don't think Harvard's getting good publicity, Andy, right now for what's going on there.
No.
So I think that with these things going on, there is a reaction, right? And the reaction is that's wrong, and they look like idiots, and people are pulling their money out of Harvard. People are pulling their money and their support away from these colleges because of this nonsense that's going on, So I don't disagree, but I think it's the opposite. I think if you don't have an education and you don't have exposure to what's going on, then you may be more apt to take part in that.
Yeah,
and I know also that these curricula have focus on things like stereotyping, right? They go deeply into
extremely
why did people have these widespread beliefs? What are the underlying themes and causes behind it? Not just of anti-Semitism, but that can lead to different kinds of discriminations and hatred. And,
Rabbi, if I could, there's one really good book by Tashlin, I think is his name. It's called The Bear That Wasn't. And what's really fascinating about it, it could be taught in a first grade class and it's taught in colleges. And what it is, it's a bear, and he ends up waking up from hibernation. They built the factory around where he was living. And they convince him that he's a man, that he's a lazy man, not a bear. And he buys into this. And the most powerful part of it is they actually take him, they being the workers and the supervisors in the factory, they take him to a zoo. And there's other bears that are in a cage at the zoo. And like, why are you're not, they convinced the bear that he wasn't one of them. He's like, you're not one of us. You're a silly man in a fur coat. Go work in the factory. So eventually his own kind rejected him because it was said enough times that he was not a bear. Because there were a lot of these ignorant people, you know what I mean? Like didn't get bought into this.
I just want to mention, I think the school systems have spent all sorts of money trying to educate kids and not to be prejudiced and so forth. But yet you look at the kids at the college campuses who've been products of these school systems, and yet they're demonstrating all sorts of anti-Semitism. I think that it goes back to when economics are bad in the United States, they have to need someone to blame. When they see people who are successful and they happen to be Jewish, you identify that they're the ones controlling everything. We're a very small population. We don't really control much of anything, but yet somehow they sell a product that the Jewish people control the banks, they control all the policies. And so all the money spent on the school systems, for some reason, aren't coming out with a product that really makes people understanding. Jewish people have always been in the lead of any type of social action type of group. We try to help all sorts of minorities and indigenous people, but yet somehow we're always the perpetrators of all these things.
Unfortunately, the teachers are not their only influence. We do the best we can.
No, I'm not blaming the teachers. I'm just saying that unless you can change behavior in homes or in churches and in synagogues to sort of accept everyone.
Do you remember 5-6 years ago, we had a terrible Islamophobic incident at Hemingway, where some first grader's locker was painted with all sorts of, it happens here too. Right? It happens to others. I mean, and it was being perpetrated by third and fourth graders. I mean, these are kids that are 9 years old. Where did they learn this? They haven't had enough time unless it was taught.
Carol, I see your hand online, and then we're going to wrap up.
Yeah, I was just as a final comment. I was listening to Bill Maher this morning on Fareed Zakaria, and he was talking about the influence of internet, of social media on our kids. And when Laura said that, teachers can only do so much. Yeah, because the other, 18 hours of the day, they're looking at their phones and looking at their laptops and, computer screens and taking in all kinds of other ideas that are very dangerous.
Thank you, Carol.
Sure.
So I want to do two more things in the next 2 minutes. I want us to read this last paragraph together on the front page, because I think it's powerful and important that we take this idea with us, and then we're going to sing for a minute because we'll close out with some singing together. So one response, we're on the last paragraph here. One response that is almost universally rejected by all thinking segments of the community is that the Holocaust is God's punishment for Israel's sin. If the Holocaust accomplished anything, it effectively killed the doctrine of retribution as the key to Jewish theodicies. It may have worked for centuries, but today it is viewed as an obscenity. It has not been invoked by any but the most traditionalist wings of the Jewish community, by those who maintain the sanctity of the past come what may. To everyone else, the sheer disparity between the explanation and the event is so wide that it just does not merit serious consideration. This is our paradigmatic instance of the death of a portion of the Jewish myth. It must be replaced, but by what? So that's what we'll be doing together over our next 3 sessions. This has been really powerful and meaningful. just to be together, just to share what it is that we're thinking about and grappling with right now as a community and as individuals. I'm going to ask our folks online just to mute and let's sing together just for our final minute. Yai nai nai nai, yai nai nai nai, ya nai 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 nai, yai nai nai nai, yai nai nai nai, ya nai 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 nai, yai nai nai nai. Da na 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 na. Na 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 na. Na 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 na. Ya na 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 na. Ya na na na. Ya na na. Ya na na ya na. Yeah, everyone. What tov.
La 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 la.